When she was at her lowest, her husband divorced him, knowing that she was kind with him but he just only need money. Grace Mwend was the kind of woman whose smile could light up a room. Born in the small town of Nakuru, Kenya, she grew up believing that love and hard work could conquer anything. She married Daniel, a charming banker who promised her forever. Together, they built a modest but happy life, at least for a while. Grace ran a small boutique in town called Elegance by Grace. It started as a tiny wooden stall where she sold handmade dresses and accessories. With time, it grew into a full-fledged fashion store employing 6 women from her community. The business wasn't just about money, it was her dream, her pride, and her way of uplifting others. But life has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. In 2024, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the market one early morning, spreading faster than anyone could react. By the time firefighters arrived, Grace's boutique, everything she had worked for, was gone. Not a single dress survived. The insurance claim was denied due to paperwork errors. Within days, she went from being a successful businesswoman to having nothing but ashes and debts. Instead of standing by her, Daniel changed. His warmth turned cold. His words became sharp. "Grace," he said one night, "I can't keep living like this. You've dragged us down with your bad luck." Tears streamed down her face. "Daniel, I'm trying to rebuild. Please, just give me time." But he had already made up his mind. Within a month, Daniel filed for divorce. He told everyone that he couldn't stay married to a woman who had failed, a woman who had nothing to offer. Grace's family begged him to reconsider, but his heart had turned to stone. When the divorce papers arrived, Grace signed them in silence. Her dreams were gone, her marriage destroyed, her heart shattered. But deep inside, a small spark still burned, the same spark that had once built her boutique from scratch. And that spark was about to ignite something far greater. The weeks after Daniel walked out of her life were a blur of silence. Grace felt like a ghost drifting through her own existence, present, yet invisible. Every corner of their once shared house reminded her of him, of laughter that now echoed as pain. She could no longer afford the rent, so she packed what little she had left, a suitcase of clothes, her mother's old Bible, and the ashes of her boutique's business registration papers, and returned to her late mother's small home in Machakos village. The people there whispered, "Isn't that the woman whose husband left her? She used to be so successful. She should have known business isn't for women." Each word cut deeper than a knife. But Grace stayed silent. She woke every day, cooked porridge from borrowed maize flour, and sat outside watching the horizon. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Her hands, once busy stitching and creating, now trembled with uncertainty. The fire inside her, the one that had built Elegance by Grace, seemed gone. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and sorrow, Grace knelt beneath the old mango tree her mother had planted years ago. She wept, not just for her marriage, or her business, but for the person she no longer recognized. Between sobs, she whispered, "God, if you still have a plan for me, please, just show me one small sign." It came, not in thunder or miracles, but through an unexpected phone call. The next morning, her phone rang. The name on the screen made her pause, Stella. They hadn't spoken in years. Stella had once been a classmate in college, now living in Nairobi, running a women's empowerment NGO. "Grace, I saw the news about the market fire. My heart broke for you. How are you holding up?" Grace's voice cracked. "I don't even know anymore, Stella. I'm lost." There was silence on the line, then Stella said, "Then let me help you find yourself again. Come to Nairobi. I have something that might interest you, a new project training women to sell African crafts online. It's funded and growing fast. You belong here." Grace hesitated. She didn't even have fare for the bus to Nairobi. Sensing her silence, Stella added gently, "I'll send you the money. Just come, please." That night, Grace packed her few belongings, prayed once more beneath the mango tree, and boarded a night bus to Nairobi, the city that had once been a dream and was now her last hope. The city was loud and alive. Car horns, chatter, and chaos filled the air. Stella welcomed her with open arms, a warm meal, and a bed to sleep in. The next morning, Grace joined a group of 10 women at Stella's training center, a bright room filled with computers, sewing machines, and colorful fabric stacked on wooden shelves. Here, she learned something new, digital entrepreneurship. Through the training, Grace discovered she could sell her designs not only in local markets but also across the world through online platforms. She learned how to photograph products, write descriptions, and communicate with buyers overseas. It was overwhelming at first. Grace struggled to understand websites and social media algorithms, but she stayed late every evening, determined to learn. Stella often found her in the corner, sketching new dress designs long after everyone else had left. A few weeks later, she launched her online brand, Mwend Creations, Mwend, meaning beloved in Kikamba, her mother's language. She started small, selling handmade Ankara handbags and dresses online. Her first sale came from a woman in South Africa who left a review saying, "You can feel the heart in every stitch." Grace cried when she read it. Encouraged, she gathered her old boutique team, women who had also lost jobs after the fire. Together, they set up a small workshop in a one-room building behind Stella's office. Grace didn't have capital, but she had vision, faith, and hands that refused to stop working. Soon, Mwend Creations began gaining attention on Instagram. Photos of bold African prints and elegant designs caught the eyes of fashion lovers worldwide. Grace shared her story publicly, not for pity, but to inspire. "I lost everything once," she wrote in a post, "but sometimes God burns the old to make room for the new." The post went viral. Within days, orders started pouring in, from Nairobi, Lagos, London, even New York. Grace stayed up late nights sewing, packaging, and replying to customers. Each order felt like a step away from the ashes of her past and closer to the woman she was meant to become. The darkness was lifting. Grace was no longer the woman Daniel left behind. She was rising again, quietly, fiercely, beautifully. The dawn of 2025 brought new light into Grace's life. Each sunrise over Nairobi felt like a quiet promise, that her pain had not been in vain. Mwend Creations, once a humble online idea born from desperation, was now catching the eyes of people far beyond Kenya's borders. Grace had learned to run her business like a symphony. Every stitch, every photo, every caption on social media carried a piece of her story. She told her customers that each dress represented hope stitched into fabric, and that message resonated. Women from across Africa began ordering her designs, not just for how beautiful they looked, but for what they stood for. Her Instagram page grew rapidly. Within 6 months, she had over 100,000 followers. Influencers began tagging her work. A Nigerian actress wore one of her gowns to a film premiere, and overnight, Grace's inbox flooded with international orders. But success never comes without sleepless nights. Her small team worked in a cramped room with just 2 sewing machines. The power went out frequently, and sometimes she had to hand-stitch by candlelight. Yet Grace refused to give up. "When you've already lost everything," she often said, "there's nothing left to fear." One morning, an email popped up with the subject line, "Collaboration Inquiry, Vogue Africa." Grace gasped. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling. It was from an editor who had seen her work online. Vogue Africa wanted to feature Mwend Creations in their Rising African Designers segment. When the magazine hit stands 2 months later, Grace's photo, radiant in her own design, filled a full page. The caption read, "From the ashes of heartbreak, Grace Mwend weaves Africa's spirit into fashion." That feature changed everything. International buyers reached out. Orders poured in from Europe and America. Within months, Grace was shipping dozens of pieces weekly. To keep up, she hired more women, single mothers, widows, and young girls who had dropped out of school. Her workshop became a sanctuary for hope. Each woman had a story of struggle, and Grace made it her mission to turn their pain into purpose. She told them, "We are not just sewing clothes, we are stitching dreams." The name Mwend Creations began appearing on runways in Nairobi and Lagos. Her signature style, bold Ankara fabrics blended with elegant modern cuts, became a symbol of African pride and resilience. Fashion houses that once ignored African designers now called her for collaboration. At the peak of this momentum, she received a call that would change her life again. "Hello, Ms. Mwend," said a deep Ghanaian voice on the phone. "My name is Kwame Boateng, investor and founder of Golden Horizon Group. I've followed your journey for months. I believe Mwend Creations can be much bigger, global even. I want to invest in your vision." Grace didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For years, she'd struggled to convince banks to give her even a small loan, and now, a major investor wanted in. A week later, they met at a cafe in Nairobi. Kwame, tall and charismatic, spoke with both admiration and respect. "You built this from nothing," he said. I want to help you open your first international store, not just in Africa, but in London. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Why me? Kwame smiled. Because your story inspires millions. And the world needs to see what Africa can create when given a chance. After long discussions, he invested $5 million in Mwend Creations. Grace expanded production, hired designers, and opened her first flagship store in Accra, Ghana. The launch drew celebrities, politicians, and the press. Within a year, stores followed in Lagos, Johannesburg, and finally London. Her brand valuation skyrocketed past $100 million. Grace, the woman once left in ruins, now stood on stages across the world, from the United Nations Women's Forum to global fashion expos. She spoke about resilience, women's empowerment, and the beauty of African creativity. At one event, she told her story. When I was abandoned, I thought my life was over. But that pain became my teacher. The same fire that burned my dreams was the one that forged my destiny. The crowd rose in applause. Cameras flashed. Grace's face, once wet with tears of betrayal, now glowed under spotlights of success. Yet deep down, she knew her story wasn't just about wealth, it was about redemption. And somewhere out there, the man who once called her a failure was watching her name shine across headlines. He had no idea what was coming next. Daniel had once believed he understood success. He used to wake up in crisp shirts, drive to work in his silver car, and look down on people who struggled. But life has a way of humbling even the proudest hearts. After divorcing Grace, he thought he'd find peace, maybe even something better. He married Vanessa, a beautiful socialite he'd met through a coworker. She was charming, lively, and always dressed like she was walking down a runway. To Daniel, she represented the life he thought he wanted, one without struggle, one filled with status. But beneath her beauty was vanity, and behind her laughter was emptiness. Vanessa loved luxury more than love. She demanded expensive handbags, vacations, and fine dining, things Daniel could barely afford once his debt started piling up. When the bank he worked for downsized, Daniel's position was cut. Vanessa didn't wait even a month before walking out. She left with his savings and half his possessions, leaving behind only a note. "You can't give me the life I deserve." It was almost poetic, the same words Daniel had once thrown at Grace. Now he lived alone in a tiny apartment on the edge of Nairobi. The walls were thin, the lights dim, and his pride long gone. His evenings were spent scrolling through social media, trying to ignore the echo of his own mistakes. Then one night, fate showed him the price of his choices. As he scrolled absent-mindedly through YouTube, a thumbnail caught his eye, a woman in a bright Ankara gown, smiling with confidence. The title read, "From Heartbreak to $100 Million, the story of Grace Mwend." Daniel froze. His breath caught in his throat. He clicked on the video. The narrator's voice echoed. Once abandoned and broken, Grace Mwend rose from the ashes to build Mwend Creations, one of Africa's most successful fashion empires. Then Grace appeared on screen, radiant, graceful, commanding. She was giving a speech at a women's entrepreneurship conference. "Pain," she said, her voice calm and powerful, "is not the end of your story. Sometimes, it's the beginning of your transformation." Daniel's eyes burned. His hands shook. He replayed the video again and again, each time feeling smaller. That night, he couldn't sleep. Her words haunted him. Every memory, her laughter, her kindness, her tears, came flooding back. The woman he had dismissed as a failure was now a global icon. He spent the next week reading every article about her. The photos made his chest ache, Grace shaking hands with world leaders, appearing on magazine covers, smiling beside African presidents. He had walked away from gold, and picked up dust. A month later, he saw an advertisement for a Nairobi event. Empowering Africa's women entrepreneurs, keynote speaker, Grace Mwend, founder of Mwend Creations. Daniel stared at the poster for a long time. His heart raced. Against all logic, he decided to go. The day of the event, he arrived early, sitting quietly in the back row. The hall was full, journalists, business leaders, young women, all waiting for Grace. When she walked in, the entire room rose in applause. She wore a stunning emerald dress that shimmered under the lights. Her confidence filled the air. Daniel could barely breathe. Grace began her speech. There was a time I thought my life was over. I had lost everything, my business, my marriage, my hope. But sometimes, what feels like an ending is really a rebirth. The audience clapped. Daniel lowered his head, ashamed. After the event, Grace greeted guests, shaking hands and taking photos. Daniel waited near the exit, nervous, his heart pounding like a drum. When she finally turned toward him, their eyes met. For a moment, the world went silent. He saw in her eyes not anger, but calm, the kind of peace that comes from healing. "Grace," he said softly, "it's been a long time." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Yes, Daniel. It has." He swallowed hard. "I've seen everything you've done. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry. I was a fool." Grace smiled faintly. "You were," she said gently. "But your leaving taught me how strong I could be. So, in a strange way, I should thank you." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "Maybe we could." Grace shook her head, her voice calm and steady. "No, Daniel. That chapter closed long ago. I don't hold grudges, but I don't reopen wounds either." She extended her hand. He took it, trembling. "Goodbye, Daniel," she whispered. Then she walked away, elegant, radiant, unshaken, while Daniel stood still, watching the woman he once abandoned disappear into the crowd, surrounded by people who now celebrated the greatness he'd been too blind to see. The applause still echoed in the hall long after Grace had walked away from Daniel. Outside, cameras flashed, journalists called her name, and young women waited to take photos with the woman who had become a symbol of hope across Africa. Grace smiled for each one, but inside, she felt a quiet peace, the kind that comes only after you've made peace with your past. That night, back in her penthouse overlooking Nairobi's skyline, Grace stood by the window. The city lights shimmered like a sea of stars, and she thought about how far she'd come, from a burnt-down boutique to the owner of a multimillion-dollar brand that now employed hundreds. But what filled her heart wasn't pride, it was purpose. A few months later, Grace launched the Grace Foundation, an organization that trained and funded young African women in business and design. She wanted every girl who had been told she was too poor, too weak, or too late to see that her dreams were still possible. At the first foundation event, a teenage girl named Aisha stood nervously before her. "Miss Grace," she said, voice trembling, "I watched your story on YouTube. My father left us, and people laugh because my mother sells vegetables. But I want to design clothes one day, like you." Grace smiled, took the girl's hands, and said softly, "Then you will, Aisha. Don't let their laughter define you. Let it fuel you." The crowd clapped, cameras flashed again. But for Grace, this moment meant more than any magazine cover ever could. Months turned into years. Mwend Creations expanded across continents, Paris, New York, Johannesburg. Grace's designs appeared on international runways, blending African identity with modern elegance. But she never forgot where it all began, the ashes, the pain, the mango tree. One evening, she returned to her mother's village. The same tree still stood tall, its roots deep in the soil of her memories. Grace placed her hand on its trunk and whispered, "Thank you for turning my heartbreak into purpose." Children played nearby, laughing freely. Women she once trained now ran their own workshops. Grace realized her story had become much bigger than her. It was now the story of every African woman who refused to give up. During a live TV interview, the host asked, "Grace, when people look at you, they see power, wealth, and beauty. What do you see when you look at yourself?" Grace smiled thoughtfully. "I see a woman who fell, but chose to rise. I see someone who learned that pain can polish you if you don't let it destroy you. And I see proof that rejection isn't the end, it's redirection." The studio erupted in applause. The interviewer nodded, eyes glistening. "And what's your message to anyone watching who feels like giving up?" Grace looked straight into the camera. "Your story isn't over. Don't measure your worth by who left you or what you lost. Every ending hides a beginning, if you have the courage to keep walking." As the credits rolled, her brand logo shimmered on screen. Mwend Creations, made with heart in Africa. And as the music faded, Grace's voice closed the video. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Tap that subscribe button, join our African Heart Tales family. And let's keep sharing stories that remind the world that even in pain, Africa rises. Hit like if you believe in second chances, and tell us in the comments.